Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The Case of Adrienne Shelly. Adrienne Shelly, whose real last name was Levine, was a well-known actress, director, and screenwriter. She was born on June 24, 1966, in Queens, New York, USA. From a very young age, she displayed a natural talent for acting. Her parents noticed her abilities early on and supported her by enrolling her in various theater programs and acting classes. By the age of 10, Adrienne began attending one of the most prestigious art centers, where many notable actors, including Robert Downey Jr. and Natalie Portman, had studied. It was there that Adrienne discovered her passion for performing. At the age of 11, she landed her first major role as the lead character in a musical, an experience she later described as the beginning of her journey toward success. Despite increasingly love acting, she is still a normal teenager, likes to spend time with friends and easily make friends thanks to her outward personality. At the age of 12, Adrienne faced a devastating loss when her father, Sheldon, suddenly passed away. To honor his memory, she chose Shelly as her stage name, preserving his name in her work. Her father had been her strongest supporter, much more so than her mother. After his death, her mother attempted to steer her in a different direction, suggesting she pursue a more traditional academic path at university. She also encouraged Adrienne to consider the film industry but warned that acting was a highly competitive and overcrowded field, where success could be elusive. Her mother believed it might be wiser to pursue a simpler and more secure profession. However, Adrienne was determined and steadfast in her aspirations. She confidently pursued her passion, enrolling at Boston University to study film production with a focus on directing. Although most sources indicate she didn't complete her university degree, the knowledge and experience she gained there proved vital to her future success. What truly propelled her forward was her persistence and strong self-belief. At the age of 18, Adrienne left the family's house and moved to live in an apartment with 3 other girls from her university. Adrienne and her friends all aspired to become actresses, but success for them was initially limited to auditioning and encountering rejections. The film industry was highly competitive, and securing roles proved difficult. Despite these challenges, Adrienne remained determined to establish herself in cinema. She spent her free time taking small roles as an extra in films, which was enough to cover her living expenses. In 1989, a turning point came when she met film director Hal Hartley. He offered her the lead role in The Unbelievable Truth, marking the official start of her acting career. Her relationship with Hartley blossomed, and she became his muse, earning roles in several of his films. This recognition extended beyond New York to Hollywood, where she gradually built her reputation in the U.S. film industry. She received offers for leading roles in Los Angeles but turned down most of them, choosing to focus her career in New York. To her, New York had a deeper connection to the film industry than Hollywood. Adrienne continued to grow professionally without relocating. She focused on her craft and steadily laid the foundation for her success. She appeared in numerous productions, including comedies, and during this time, decided to explore screenwriting and directing. In 2001, she met Andy Ostroy, with whom she entered into a romantic relationship. They got married, and in 2003 welcomed their daughter, Sophie. While pregnant, Adrienne began writing the script for the comedy film Waitress. The story featured a realistic portrayal. The main character was pregnant and trying to escape from her abusive husband, who tormented her throughout their marriage. This was a bold move, as pregnancy in films is usually depicted in a positive light. Adrienne chose to highlight the challenges women faced during this time, offering a fresh and innovative perspective. After giving birth to her daughter, Sophie, Adrienne decided to continue pursuing her career in the film industry. Waitress became a true success and marked a significant milestone in her career. The film premiered in 2007, but tragically, Adrienne did not live to see its triumph, as she had passed away before its release. While working on the film, she rented an office on Abingdon Square in Manhattan's West Village. It was a simple apartment where she often worked alone. For her, this space was a personal sanctuary, offering a sense of safety amidst her creativity. Adrienne crafted a unique atmosphere in her work environment, showing great care and reverence for her improvised studio. She approached her work with meticulous attention to detail, one that visitors often remarked was almost excessive. It was clear to everyone that Adrienne had a promising future ahead of her, which made the tragic and shocking end of her career all the more devastating. November 1st, 2006, started as a typical day for Adrienne and her family. She woke up early to prepare for work in her office, while her husband, Andy, and their daughter, Sophie, followed their usual morning routine. Andy, an actor and producer, took Sophie to kindergarten and then headed to work, dropping Adrienne off at her workplace along the way. Throughout their relationship, Adrienne and Andy maintained the habit of staying in regular contact during the day, frequently calling each other to share updates. This tradition had remained unbroken for years. However, on November 1st, Adrienne's silence was startling. She didn't call Andy and failed to answer any of his calls, which was completely out of character for her. Andy wasn't initially worried. He understood how devoted Adrienne was to her work and assumed she might be tied up, especially since she had planned to start several new projects that day. He figured she was deeply engrossed and decided not to disturb her over minor issues. Andy worked through the day until evening, but when he wrapped up his shift and called her again, she still didn't answer. By this point, her lack of communication was unusual. Adrienne typically made time to reach out during her busy periods or at least send a quick message. Her silence was becoming increasingly concerning. Around 5:30 p.m., Andy picked up his daughter from kindergarten. Adrienne was still unreachable, and his concern deepened. Her behavior was unlike her. Normally, she would have checked in or let him know if she was occupied. Worried, Andy decided to drive to her rented office, a habit he often practiced on gloomy days like this due to the poor weather in New York. He tried calling her again to arrange a pickup time but received no response. By now, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Andy took his daughter, Sophie, to her grandmother's house and asked the grandmother to watch Sophie while he went to the office. Without a spare key to the building, he approached the doorman upon arrival, hoping to gain access with a duplicate key. The concierge refused to give Andy the key due to strict building policies, prompting Andy to suggest they go upstairs together. The doorman was familiar with Adrienne, as she was a celebrity, and recognized her husband as well. He mentioned that Adrienne hadn't left the building all day, which was unusual because her work should have been finished, and she should have been preparing to leave. The concierge agreed to Andy's suggestion, but when they reached the floor, they realized the keys weren't needed. The door was unlocked. This was unexpected, as Adrienne was always meticulous about locking her office, even for brief absences. Typically, she would secure the door from the inside to ensure privacy and avoid interruptions. Once inside the studio, Andy immediately noticed Adrienne's clothes and shoes in their usual place, a designated spot reserved for them. This indicated that she was likely still inside. He began calling her name as he moved through the rooms. In the kitchen, bags of food remained untouched. In the bedroom, the bed was partially disheveled, with its sheet torn off, yet there was no sign of Adrienne. When he entered the bathroom, he was horrified to discover the lifeless body of her. She was hanging from a sheet tied to the shower rod. Shocked and panicked, Andy screamed and immediately tried to lower his wife's body in an attempt to save her. The building's caretaker, who was nearby, heard the commotion and immediately called police and emergency services, sensing the gravity of the situation. Upon their arrival, officers found Andy in tears, overwhelmed by grief and unable to compose himself for some time. Investigators initially concluded that Adrienne, a successful actress and director, had ended her life. However, Andy adamantly rejected this conclusion, refusing to believe it. He insisted that his wife did not suffer from depression, mental illness, or addiction. There were no signs, not even the slightest indication, that could suggest she would voluntarily end her own life. On the contrary, Adrienne appeared to be thriving at this point in her life. Her career was on an upward trajectory, with each new production surpassing the last. She had a loving relationship with Andy and a deep bond with their young daughter, Sophie, whom she cherished. From Andy's perspective, Adrienne would never willingly leave her daughter behind, especially given her own experience of losing her father at age 12 and understanding the profound pain such a loss could inflict on a child. Despite Andy's assertions, law enforcement maintained that depression could often be hidden, with symptoms that weren't necessarily tied to struggles in one's family or personal life. They explained that individuals could appear outwardly fine, even happy, while quietly battling unseen difficulties until the very end. Throughout this time, Andy refused to back down. He tirelessly urged law enforcement to conduct a more thorough investigation, steadfastly believing that Adrienne had been murdered. He committed himself to proving this, despite the daunting challenges ahead. The autopsy revealed that Adrienne's death was caused by a sheet tied around her neck, but Andy doubled down on his efforts, insisting the case be treated as a homicide. To substantiate such claims, however, concrete evidence was necessary. The scene showed no signs of blood, struggle, or any obvious clues suggesting the presence of an intruder on the day of Adrienne's death. However, some unusual details came to light. Would someone who was about to end their life go shopping and behave as though they had plans for the following day? Upon closer examination of the crime scene, investigators discovered a suspicious clue, a faint shoe print on the toilet lid. This led them to suspect that it might have been left by an unknown person. It is possible that the attacker, or possibly Adrienne herself, stood on the toilet lid to reach the shower curtain rod and tie the sheet. Andy immediately recognized the shoe print on the toilet lid as evidence of a criminal presence. He explained to investigators that Adrienne kept her office very clean. Adrienne had installed a special closet and cabinet near the entrance, requiring everyone to remove their shoes or boots before entering. Walking around the apartment in footwear was strictly forbidden, and Adrienne would become extremely upset when this rule was violated. Therefore, Andy firmly believed that the shoe print could only have been left by someone who entered the studio without her permission. Adrienne's fastidiousness regarding cleanliness was well known among her close friends and family, all of whom confirmed it during interviews with detectives. Upon realizing the connection, investigators scrutinized the shoe prints, paying close attention to the tread pattern and size. Their findings supported Andy's claims. The print did not match the shoes worn by either him or his wife. Furthermore, fingerprints were discovered on the shower rod that did not belong to Adrienne. While it appeared that someone had tried to wipe them away, the effort had been incomplete, leaving traces for investigators to uncover. Adrienne's close acquaintances were investigated, but none of them had shoes matching the traces found. Furthermore, their fingerprints did not match those recovered from the scene. Analysis of the residue on the toilet lid revealed it was chalk or a similar type of dust, typically uncommon in homes or offices without ongoing repairs. Detectives speculated that the traces might belong to someone employed in the construction or renovation industry. Initially, they theorized that Adrienne might have scheduled a repair appointment for that day. However, there was no evidence or information to support this theory. Adrienne would have informed her husband if she had made such arrangements. In reality, everything in the studio was in perfect condition. She had no need for the services of a contractor. Detectives investigating the case remembered a remarkable detail. When Adrienne was found dead in her studio, someone reported hearing noises that sounded like hammers and drills. Initially, the police were skeptical about this detail but decided to investigate further. It turned out that renovation work was indeed taking place in the apartment directly below Adrienne's studio. The apartment owner, who had no connection to Adrienne and didn't even know her, confirmed that workers were present on November 1st, completing the final stages of the renovation. He himself was not present in the apartment at the time because the construction company needed access to tear down walls and install new partitions. This detail intrigued the detectives, as such work generates significant dust capable of leaving white marks. The apartment owner granted them permission to inspect the site, where they found substantial dust samples, which were subsequently sent to the lab for testing. Laboratory results confirmed that the dust matched the residue found in Adrienne's studio, indicating that at least one worker from the renovation had entered her office. Detectives then contacted the general contractor at Bradford General Contractors to identify the workers who had been on site during that period. At this stage, investigators encountered difficulties due to the company's practice of cutting costs by hiring workers who were not officially employed. This was common in the United States at the time, especially with the influx of migrants. Many workers were undocumented and lacked proper visas. However, following a period of investigation, the individual overseeing the project verified the list of everyone present at the apartment on November 1st. Among them, the most suspicious was Diego Pilco, a 19-year-old who had recently arrived in the U.S. from Ecuador. Upon his arrival, he started working for Bradford to save money. Initially, he planned to use the earnings to repay a debt in his native Ecuador, which had helped finance his journey to the United States. Diego's behavior drew attention. He often appeared anxious and acted strangely. He was still working for Bradford when investigators tracked him down. They brought him to the police station for questioning, where detectives got straight to the point. Diego was directly asked about Adrienne's murder. Surprisingly, he did not deny it. Instead, he confessed almost immediately upon entering the office. He explained his account of the incident, repeatedly stressing that it had been accidental. He insisted he was not a bad person but was struggling with severe financial difficulties and had acted out of desperation. Diego revealed that on November 1st, he was working in the apartment below Adrienne's studio alongside several other laborers, completing the final stages of the renovation. The demolition of walls created substantial noise, which was expected given the nature of the work. About an hour into their tasks, Adrienne became upset with the loud noise. Frustrated, she angrily shouted that the noise was interfering with her ability to focus. Diego felt her behavior was condescending, as if she were implying her work was more important than theirs. She demanded the workers stop making noise, but Diego considered this unreasonable, as demolishing walls could not be done quietly. The young workers calmly explained the situation to Adrienne. However, she refused to listen. She entered the apartment and began yelling. Frustrated, Diego grabbed a hammer and threw it in her direction. Miraculously, she dodged the tool. She then started shouting even louder and threatened to call the police. With that, she left the apartment and headed upstairs. Worried about the possible consequences of his actions and fearing deportation, Diego followed her, desperately pleading for her not to involve the authorities. Adrienne was furious and ignored his pleas. Once she arrived at her studio, Diego grabbed her sleeve, still begging her not to report him. She may have interpreted his actions as an attack and began screaming. Losing control once again, Diego struck her in the face. Adrienne fell, hit her head, and stopped moving. Convinced that she had died from the blow, Diego panicked. He locked himself in the office, overwhelmed and unsure of what to do next. Adrienne remained still and did not get up. Eventually, Diego realized he had killed someone and decided to cover up the crime. He took a bed sheet and staged the scene to make it look like Adrienne had voluntarily ended her life. This was the initial version of his confession, but the police did not believe his story. One key issue they identified was the absence of dust on Adrienne's shoes. If she had indeed entered the apartment under renovation, as Diego claimed, there would have been dust on her footwear. Moreover, Adrienne's shoes were discovered neatly arranged on a specially prepared cabinet, indicating that she had deliberately taken them off. This detail contradicted Diego's claim that there had been no time for her to take off her shoes or place them there. Another significant inconsistency was the lack of witnesses to Adrienne's alleged aggression. Although Diego claimed that she had come downstairs and shouted at the workers, none of them confirmed his statement. Additionally, neighbors in nearby apartments, who were present at the time, should have heard the commotion if Adrienne had caused a scene. However, none of them reported hearing anything. Detectives uncovered another crucial detail when Andy mentioned that her wallet contained no cash, a notable discrepancy, as she normally carried cash, preferring it over credit cards. She would routinely keep at least a couple $100s on her, sometimes more for various needs. This habit helped investigators identify a possible motive, an illegal immigrant seeking to profit from Adrienne's belongings. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed that the circumstances of her death did not align with Diego's initial confession. She had still been alive when she was hanged. Her actual cause of death was strangulation, with no evidence of a fatal head injury. Despite these glaring contradictions, Diego persisted in sticking to his story for a while, maintaining that Adrienne had initiated the conflict. However, under pressure from mounting evidence and inconsistencies, Diego's account began to change significantly. Detectives interviewed his acquaintances to gather insights into his character but found that he had limited interactions outside work. His colleagues described him as someone struggling with financial issues, desperately trying to pay off debts. Beyond this, he seemed to be an ordinary young man hoping to establish his life in the U.S. Further investigations among the residents of the apartment building revealed additional witnesses. Diego had a troubling habit of staring at women for extended periods, an unsettling behavior that made residents uncomfortable. However, no one had observed him behaving aggressively or attacking anyone. Adrienne's husband, Andy, continued to insist that Diego's account was false and merely an attempt to justify his actions. Andy maintained that his wife was never aggressive and always treated others with respect, regardless of their background. The missing cash from her wallet pointed to a clear motive. Although valuable equipment and supplies remained intact, the loss of several $100s remained unexplained. Before the trial, scheduled for 2008, Diego presented a new explanation that was more plausible than his initial story. He claimed that he had been drinking while at work and encountered Adrienne in the elevator. He stared at her and suddenly realized she was someone famous. Recognizing her as an actress, he quickly assumed that she likely had money. Seeing this as an opportunity to resolve his financial problems, he believed breaking into her apartment presented a chance to profit. Pretending to head to the top floor, Diego carefully noted the apartment Adrienne entered. He spent the day observing and listening, waiting for the moment she would leave, possibly to go to the store. Later, when she returned with shopping bags, she left the door slightly ajar as her hands were full. After placing her bags down, she moved to the kitchen, likely to organize her groceries. Out of habit, she undressed and placed her clothes and shoes in the closets. Meanwhile, Diego discreetly watched her every move from the landing just outside her apartment. As the door was left partially ajar, Diego noticed the gap and spotted a bag with a wallet peeking out. Unable to resist the temptation, he saw an opportunity to steal. Peeking inside the apartment, he confirmed Adrienne was unaware of his presence and entered. He grabbed the wallet and took the cash. As he tried to return the wallet to the bag, Adrienne unexpectedly returned and confronted him. She screamed and rushed toward the phone, presumably to call the police. Panicking, Diego chased after her and covered her mouth and nose to silence her. Within moments, Adrienne lost consciousness due to suffocation. Realizing that leaving Adrienne alive was too risky, as she had seen him and could easily identify him, he decided to stage her death to end her life. He used a bed sheet and shower curtain rod to make it look like she had voluntarily ended her life. He later admitted in court that he had stood on the toilet lid to hang her. During the trial, he apologized to Adrienne's family, whose lives had been shattered by her tragic and untimely death. Unsurprisingly, his apology was met with no forgiveness. Andy, the husband of Adrienne, was determined to ensure that the perpetrator, whom he referred to as a subhuman, would receive a life sentence. However, he was deeply shocked when the court ruled the case as manslaughter and sentenced Diego to 25 years in prison. Diego is set to be released shortly before his 45th birthday. Though Andy found the verdict profoundly unjust, he had no choice but to accept the court's decision as final. Following this tragic incident, Andy dedicated himself to honoring his wife's memory. He established a foundation in her name, providing scholarships and financial support to aspiring women filmmakers. Additionally, Andy created a film about Adrienne, recounting the difficult and heroic journey of her life. For the film's final scene, he personally met with Diego, who gave a brief interview and recounted his crimes on camera. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valerie Pride. Valerie Pride was born on March 9, 1958, and grew up in Arizona with her 5 brothers and 1 sister, which contributed to her strong and determined character. She attended South Mountain High School, where she gained a reputation for her intelligence and ambition. After graduating, she aimed to continue her education at Arizona State University, driven to create a better future for herself. During her high school years, Valerie fell in love with a young man named Jimmy Pride. Their romance flourished, and in 1974, they got married. Just a year later, they welcomed their first daughter, Shansha. In 1977, their family expanded again with the birth of their second daughter, Duana. Despite being a young mother, Valerie continued to pursue her ambitions. She aspired to become an electrician, a profession that was predominantly male at the time, and she did not let anything stand in her way. By the time Duana was born, Valerie had been accepted into a job training program sponsored by the United Electrical Workers, a rare and competitive opportunity. She made history by becoming the first black female electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, all while caring for her two young children. Her life was a delicate balance of motherhood, work, and being a trailblazer in her industry. However, Valerie faced challenges in her personal life as well. Her marriage to Jimmy eventually ended in divorce. Even so, she remained strong, focusing on her career and her children, and trying to give them the best life possible. After the divorce, Valerie found new love with Ben Daniels, a co-worker at the nuclear power plant. Ben also had children from a previous marriage, and as their relationship deepened, they began planning for their future together. Although they appear perfect on the outside, their relationship is actually unstable. Valerie's sister, Vicki McDonald, revealed that Ben's past was negatively affecting their relationship. Vicki mentioned that Ben would often reassure Valerie that he had everything under control. Despite these issues, Valerie maintained her faith in Ben and their future, and before long, the two took a big step forward in their relationship together. In 1982, Valerie and Ben decided to purchase a new home in a quiet area of South Phoenix, Arizona. This marked a significant milestone in their lives. They selected a newly constructed Spanish-style home, imagining it as a place for a new beginning. Meanwhile, Valerie was finishing her final year of training to become an electrician, nearing a career breakthrough. After her divorce, she had found love again, and now they had a new home to create memories with their daughters. Everything seemed to be going very well. Sometimes, life's most promising moments can disappear in an instant. Just weeks after moving into their new home, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Labor Day weekend in 1982 began like any other for Valerie and her daughters. It was meant to be a time for relaxation, family bonding, and simple pleasures. But on Monday, September 6th, what started as a normal day turned horrific. At around 4 p.m., Ben received a call that no parent ever wants to hear. His 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had had an epileptic seizure while bathing. Her mother was with her but had stepped out for a minute. In that short time, the little girl suffered a seizure and submerged underwater. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors battled to save her, but by the time Ben arrived, it was too late. His daughter had been pronounced dead. While Ben was at the hospital dealing with an unimaginable loss, Valerie and her daughters were at home, completely unaware of the situation. In a time before cell phones, Valerie had no quick way to contact Ben or find out what was happening, so she had to wait for him to call her. Around 9:30 that evening, Valerie spoke on the phone with Ben's brother. This call became her last known contact with anyone outside her home. They spoke for about 10 minutes, focusing on the condition of Ben's daughter in the hospital. During the conversation, there was a knock on the front door of Valerie's house. She informed Ben's brother that she needed to hang up to answer the door, as Ben was not home. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Neither she nor Ben's brother realized that this would be their final conversation. At around 10 p.m., after several hours in the hospital, Ben returned home, exhausted and grieving the loss of his daughter. He just wanted to get some rest. However, as he neared his house, he noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual, especially in the Arizona summer when everyone kept their doors closed to maintain cool air indoors. Ben carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside, where he saw a horrifying sight: blood everywhere. Valerie and her two daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been murdered. They had been brutally attacked in the living room, just a few feet apart. 8-year-old Shantia and 4-year-old Duana lay lifeless in the living room, their small bodies covered in blood. Valerie was also found dead near the kitchen, her body soaked in blood. The home they had just moved into, where they hoped to start anew, had turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. Ben's screams echoed through the night. Overwhelmed with grief, he collapsed, crying out so loudly that neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening. Unable to help, the neighbors called the police, as Ben was too devastated to do anything but mourn. For any parent, losing a child is an indescribable pain, but returning home to find one's entire family slaughtered is simply beyond comprehension. When the police arrived, even the most experienced officers struggled to comprehend the scene before them. Many described it as the most horrific crime scene they had ever encountered. Blood was everywhere, covering the floors and walls. Shansha and Duana were discovered huddled together in the living room near a love seat, still in their pajamas, which suggested that they were preparing for bed when the attack occurred. Valerie was found in the dining area close to the kitchen, her body just a few feet from the back door, as if she had been trying to escape. There were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, indicating that the killer either had permission to enter or managed to get in without breaking anything. The police began to consider a disturbing possibility when they learned about a knock at the door during Valerie's last phone call. The person who knocked might have been the one responsible for the horrific crime. Furthermore, it was revealed that the suspect had not stayed in the house after the murders. They exited through the back door and jumped over the fence, vanishing into the night. The murders were initially believed to be the result of a robbery gone wrong, but that theory was quickly dismissed. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, and no evidence of an intruder. Instead, they discovered a scene of shocking violence. Someone had entered the home with the singular purpose of committing murder. The pressing question for investigators was, who would want to kill a young mother and her children in such a brutal manner? Time was critical, as a dangerous killer was still on the loose, and they needed to apprehend him before he could strike again. That night, the neighborhood was quiet, but one person had noticed something unusual. As police officers searched the area, a neighbor mentioned hearing a loud argument coming from Valerie's home around 9:45 p.m., but thought it was just a typical family disagreement. When they looked outside, they saw nothing, no suspicious individuals, no signs of trouble, and nothing that seemed alarming. An hour later, at 11 p.m., Valerie's ex-husband, Jimmy Pride, arrived at the house. When the officers informed him that his daughters had been murdered, he collapsed on the pavement, screaming in anguish, just like Ben had. He couldn't contain his emotions, writhing in pain and sobbing. The anguish was so intense that the police had to intervene by force to calm him down. Meanwhile, behind the house, there was a bloody handprint on the wooden fence. This was clear evidence that the murderer had escaped by climbing over the fence and disappearing into the darkness, likely through the yard of a nearby abandoned home. But whose handprint was it, and what kind of person could commit such a brutal act? The investigation took a more disturbing turn when detectives learned that Valerie's family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They had been there for just a few weeks, barely enough time to make friends, let alone enemies. No one truly knew them, yet someone wanted them dead. Detectives searched for answers by examining Valerie's life. They investigated her social relationships, her family, and sought any signs of a possible enemy. However, as they delved deeper, the truth became increasingly troubling. There was nothing to uncover. Valerie had no history of conflict, no long-standing grudges, and no background suggesting that she would meet a violent end. She was a devoted mother and lived an ordinary life. Yet, someone had violently disrupted that life in a horrific manner. Autopsies revealed that both Valerie and her two daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been attacked multiple times. Notably, there was no evidence of abuse, which eliminated one possible motive, but it did not bring them any closer to solving the case. With each passing day, the investigation stalled, unanswered questions continued to accumulate, and the town was left in a state of fear. On September 10, 1982, Valerie and her daughters were buried, but their funerals were filled with tension. The community was haunted by the reality that a killer remained at large. Detectives then discovered an unusual clue, a month before the murders, Valerie and Ben's home had been broken into. Initially, it appeared to be a simple burglary, but the details were alarming. The intruder rummaged through the house and also slashed their water bed. Disturbingly, they took Valerie's clothes and tossed them into the water, indicating a personal motive. It was clear that this was not a simple thief looking for valuables, but rather an enemy who wanted to send a message. Could this have been a threat? Did Valerie unknowingly encounter someone dangerous? Investigators were eager to find connections, but the case hit another dead end. The culprit had disappeared without a trace. As months went by, what seemed like promising leads faded away. Numerous tips came in, each one offering the possibility of a breakthrough, but none brought the detectives any closer to solving the case. What once felt urgent was now growing cold. As the situation became tense, rumors began to spread throughout the town, accompanied by various theories, such as ghosts in the night. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the recent murders were linked to the tragic death of Ben's daughter. Some residents speculated that Valerie and her daughters were murdered as a twisted form of revenge. Ben's 9-year-old daughter had died in an accident, leading some to believe that someone held Valerie responsible for it. However, investigators later clarified that the girl had suffered an epileptic seizure and had drowned, with the autopsy confirming that there was no foul play involved. Despite this, rumors continued to thrive, contributing to the growing anxiety in the town. As the one-year anniversary of the murders approaches, detectives have not yet found any new leads. The murders of Valerie and her daughters shocked the community, and investigators are still searching for information, but to no avail. Valerie's Union and the Silent Witness program have offered a $2,000 reward, yet no significant evidence has been uncovered so far. In August 1983, the case took an unexpected turn. Police announced that a suspect had been arrested, and the news quickly spread throughout the town, raising hopes that justice would be served. What surprised everyone, however, was that the suspect was only 14 years old and still a high school student. Authorities also disclosed that they were searching for 2 other suspects, one juvenile and one adult, believed to be involved in the murders. The police suspected that the murder might have been an act of revenge for the death of Ben's daughter, a theory that had been discussed but never confirmed. The arrested teenager was believed to be related to Ben's daughter. Could Valerie have been blamed for the child's death? Was there a deep-seated resentment that led to something violent? This idea was frightening, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Ben's daughter's death was considered an accident, why would anyone blame Valerie for it? And if the motive was revenge, why target her daughters as well? It was confusing, and even the investigators were skeptical. Just when it seemed that a motive had been identified, the case became more complicated. Within 24 hours of the arrest, the 14-year-old was released. The district attorney decided not to file charges, stating that more investigation was necessary. The evidence the detectives had was not strong enough to support a case in court. 2 other potential suspects were never arrested, no charges, no answers. The case, which had briefly reignited interest, went cold again. 2 years later, a neighbor found a surprising clue, a knife buried in a backyard. It closely resembled the one thought to have been used in the murders. Investigators quickly sent it to the crime lab, hoping it might finally provide a breakthrough. But once again, optimism turned into disappointment. The knife was tested for DNA, but there were no matches, no evidence linking it to Valerie, Shansha, or Duana. It was yet another dead end in a case that continued to be a mystery. As the years passed, the detectives never gave up on the case. They meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed over 1,000 people, and followed every lead, but they still couldn't identify the killer or their motive. By 2012, investigators admitted that they had exhausted all possibilities and needed the public's help, believing that someone had vital information. They were convinced that this was a deeply personal crime. The perpetrator had entered Valerie's family home with the sole intention of committing murder. Now, more than 40 years later, the case remains unsolved. The brutal murders of Valerie, Shansha, and Duana continue to haunt the community, leaving an emotional scar that won't heal. Investigators think that someone close to Valerie might hold the key to the truth. But how could someone capable of such brutality carry on as if nothing had happened? Do they feel remorse? Do they ever worry about being caught? Or have they convinced themselves that they got away with murder? In recent years, advancements in forensic technology have allowed detectives to revisit the evidence. DNA collected from the crime scene has been submitted to a national database, raising hopes for a breakthrough. However, even if the killer is eventually identified, no explanation will ever make sense. Nothing can justify the horrific act of killing an innocent mother and her two young daughters. This crime epitomizes senseless violence. Valerie, Shansha, and Duana did not deserve what happened to them. Regardless of how much time has passed, one thing is clear: those capable of such a terrible act must be held accountable. Valerie Pride's life was a testament to resilience, ambition, and a profound love for her two daughters, Shansha and Duana. She was determined to pursue a stellar career as the first Black electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear power plant and to build a new life with Ben Daniels in South Phoenix. However, on Labor Day weekend in 1982, her family's dreams and future were brutally snatched away in a horrific act of violence. More than 40 years later, the mystery of who killed them and why remains unsolved, leaving a lasting pain in the community. Despite advances in forensic science, nothing can erase the tragedy that claimed the lives of an innocent mother and her two young daughters. In January 2024, in northern Chile, a vast and barren desert became the site of a disturbing discovery. Human remains were found buried beneath the sand near the city of Calama, an isolated area where the harsh climate can preserve bodies for a long time. Their thorough examination indicated that the remains had been intentionally hidden. The rocky terrain made digging challenging. Authorities later confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis shows she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Remains identified as those of Javiera Jimenez, who went missing in 2022. Javiera Jimenez grew up in Chile. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility early on. Her parents worked diligently to create a comfortable life for their children and instilled values of determination and independence in them. Javiera learned quickly that to succeed, she would need to rely on her own hard work. From a young age, she was known for her energetic and goal-oriented personality. In school, she excelled in academics, especially in math and science. However, her greatest passion was working with people. She had a natural talent for connecting with others. She was always eager to help and foster relationships. As a teenager, Javiera aspired to become a dentist. After finishing high school, she enrolled in college to study dental care, dreaming of becoming a skilled professional and eventually opening her own practice. Determined to advance her career, she balanced her studies with a part-time job as a hostess at a bar, where she welcomed customers and helped create a friendly atmosphere. This job not only provided her with income but also helped her enhance her communication skills. In addition to her studies and work, Javiera was actively building her presence on social media. She began by sharing small posts about her daily life, which garnered a larger audience over time. She collaborated with local brands to promote clothing, cosmetics, and other products. Her charm and engaging personality quickly made her blog popular. Javiera didn't focus only on work and academics. She prioritized personal development, was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, managed all her living expenses on her own. Her family was proud of her early independence and her ability to overcome challenges. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family, staying close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly, and sharing her future aspirations. A stagnant life was never an option for her. She was constantly striving to progress. Before she vanished, she had ambitious plans. She was getting ready to move into a new home, aiming to advance her social media career and continuing her studies. Javiera met Andres Sutter in 2022 through a group of mutual friends she frequently hung out with. Initially, there were no red flags with Andres. He was charming, self-assured, and good at building relationships. He made a strong first impression, appearing considerate, engaged, and truly interested in her life. Soon after, their talks evolved into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything felt ideal. He was supportive, encouraged her goals, and admired her independence. However, as time passed, red flags began to appear. Javiera noticed that Andres was excessively jealous. He was uncomfortable with her job at the bar, monitored her interactions, and frequently asked where she was, who she was with. His behavior became increasingly intrusive. He would show up unexpectedly, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her phone, questioning every new contact. His jealousy became unreasonable. He particularly disliked it when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if men were present. Soon, other troubling issues emerged. Andres was often unclear about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job but always seemed to have money. When she inquired about his work, he avoided giving direct answers. Over time, Javiera discovered that Andres's name was associated with certain groups involved in illegal activities. Among a small circle of friends, rumors circulated that he might be involved in criminal activities, including theft and the illegal trade of copper. The turning point in Javiera and Andres's relationship occurred when Javiera discovered that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with illegal activities and didn't want to be involved with someone who could put her in harm's way. Eventually, she decided to end their relationship, stating that she couldn't see a future with him. However, Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to pursue her, calling her frequently, showing up uninvited, and trying to persuade her to return to him. He dismissed her rejection, believing that she would eventually change her mind. As Javiera started to avoid him, Andres became even more persistent, threatening her by claiming he knew everything about her and wouldn't allow her to leave. Javiera had no idea that their breakup would have serious consequences. On August 26, 2022, Javiera's day began like any other. She and her mother, Gladys Galagillos, went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and discussed the changes coming in Javiera's life. Javiera is moving out. She was excited about this new chapter. During their conversation, Javiera expressed her ambitions for the future. She discussed her goals of advancing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her education. Her enthusiasm and drive were evident. Her mother felt happy seeing her daughter so excited. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera assisted her mother with household chores, then folded the things into the suitcase. Later that evening, before leaving, Javiera mentioned to her mother that she intended to spend the night at a friend's house. This was not unusual, as she often stayed over with friends. Once she arrived, she and her mother continued to text each other, as they usually did. Everything seemed perfectly normal. However, as midnight approached, a text arrived that changed everything. Andres messaged her, "I found you, dog." This news was monumental for Javiera, as her dog, Lucky, had been missing for a few days, and she had been searching tirelessly. She had even posted on social media, offering a reward for Lucky's safe return, so she immediately reacted to Andres's message. Then she stopped texting her mom. A few hours later, all attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. The next day, Javiera was expected to come home, but she never arrived. Her family started reaching out to her friends, but no one knew her whereabouts. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in distress. They had only two clues: their last conversation with her and a message that later became crucial in the investigation. Javiera's disappearance caused deep concern for her family and friends. However, the one person who seemed unconcerned was Andres. When her mother finally managed to reach him, he responded in a detached manner, showing no signs of worry. When Gladys inquired about her daughter's location, he calmly stated he had no idea and then proceeded to share his version of events. That night, he met with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They drove to several places but couldn't find it. To distract her, he suggested going to Calama, his hometown. Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her because she was moving the next day, so it seemed she might have intended to stay at his place overnight. However, his account became less clear from there. He claimed they had an argument during the trip. Suddenly, Javiera realized that her suitcase was missing. She thought it might have fallen out of the trunk. Distressed, she insisted they go back to look for it. According to Andres' testimony, he left Javiera at the entrance to the city of Calama while he returned to retrieve a suitcase that fell out of the truck they were both traveling in. This version of events was confusing. Javiera was supposedly left alone on a highway at night, far from the city, without a way to get home or call for help. However, Andres made no effort to persuade her to return to the car, nor did he check if she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed something was wrong with his account. When she pressed him for details, Andres began to contradict himself. At first, he said he had dropped her off near Calama, then he changed it to somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't remember the exact spot, which raised further suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her or any of Javiera's friends to inform them that he left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. He said he thought she was just upset and would find her way home. A few hours later, he altered his story again, claiming that he had been in a car accident after leaving Javiera. He said another car had collided with his from behind, and he went to the hospital for a checkup. This, he explained, was why he didn't go back to look for her. Late Saturday night, almost 24 hours after Javiera went missing, her mother received an unexpected and concerning message from an unknown number. It read, "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother." Gladys read the message repeatedly, sensing something was amiss. The tone felt distant and impersonal, which alarmed her, but the errors stood out even more. Javiera was always meticulous with her texts, avoiding shortcuts and spelling mistakes. This message, however, was filled with typos and awkward phrasing that didn't match her style. Gladys tried to call the number, but the call failed. The phone had already been turned off, increasing her anxiety. Worried, she showed the message to Javier's friends, and they all agreed Javier would never write something like this. They recognized her usual texting style and emotional expressions. The content of the message was also suspiciously vague. Where was she? What kind of accident had occurred? Why hadn't she provided more details? Why send a cryptic message from an unknown number instead of calling? Gladys took immediate action and reported the message to the police. They documented it as a potential attempt to mislead the investigation and distract from a possible crime. A task force was quickly assigned to the case. Investigators traced the message to its originating SIM card. The phone carrier confirmed it was linked to a false identity, a common method used when buying anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement tried to locate the phone. They hoped to find its general location, but it had been turned off shortly after the message was sent. The last known signal placed it near Calama, the same area where Andres claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further examination revealed that the phone had only been used once, suggesting the message was pre-planned and aimed at deceiving her family into believing she had left on her own terms. Experts analyzed the content of the message and found that it did not match Javiera's usual writing style. The errors and unusual phrases were clear indicators that it was not written by her. This finding became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting that the message was fabricated and indicating that Javiera did not disappear voluntarily. As a result, investigators began treating the case as a potential crime, with Andres emerging as the primary suspect. However, the investigation progressed slowly due to a lack of concrete evidence. Concerned that each passing day without answers diminished their chances of uncovering the truth, Javiera's family and friends initiated their own investigation. They spoke with people familiar with Andres, examined his background, and searched for any links to criminal activity. Soon, they discovered evidence connecting him to illegal operations. Through shared contacts, they found individuals who claimed Andres had participated in stealing copper from trains and was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metals on the black market. Furthermore, accounts of his aggressive behavior emerged. Those who knew him described him as having a short temper and a tendency to get into conflicts, often involving physical fights, an inability to tolerate being contradicted. These details increased the family's concerns. If Andres had a history of aggression, he was certainly capable of committing a serious crime, particularly in a moment of rage. Javier's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she expressed worry that he was tracking her, calling her several times a day, and demanding to know her whereabouts. While her loved ones continued to search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres's car. Since he was the last person known to see Javier alive, his truck could contain important evidence. Inside the truck, investigators discovered traces of blood. Initial analysis showed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also found fibers that seemed to match the clothing Javier was wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears: the blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This revelation completely undermined Andres's claim that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his truck voluntarily, why was her blood found inside? And if she had been injured, why didn't he report it? Police obtained GPS data from Andres' vehicle, which revealed that on the night Javier disappeared, he was driving towards Calama. However, instead of taking the main road, he opted for a side road that led into the desert. His car remained in that isolated area for a long time before it continued on its way. This discovery became a significant turning point in the case, leading investigators to suspect that a crime may have taken place there or that evidence was concealed. When Andres learned that the police had received forensic results, he understood that his arrest was imminent. His behavior changed. He ceased communication with everyone, including those he previously trusted. The day before he was scheduled to be questioned by police, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras recorded him exiting the building with a small backpack and getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he left in a hurry and did not return. Authorities quickly issued an arrest warrant for him, but by that point, he was already gone. Further investigation showed that Andres had used false documents to cross the border, making him a fugitive. His name was added to an international criminal database, but he managed to evade capture. For Javier's family, the only option was to continue seeking justice and waiting. They believed strongly that he would eventually slip up again. When he did, they were confident that the law would catch up with him. Law enforcement's initial efforts to catch Andres were unsuccessful. They found his abandoned car on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was missing, indicating he had carefully planned his escape. Phone records revealed that, just hours before disappearing, he had contacted several people already under investigation for criminal activities, suggesting he used these connections to vanish. Eventually, investigators confirmed that Andres had illegally fled Chile into Bolivia. He avoided official crossings by using lesser-known smuggling routes favored by traffickers. After crossing the border, he adopted a new identity. For months, he successfully evaded capture, fully aware that authorities were searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javier's family refused to lose hope. Gladys tirelessly worked to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres appeared on international wanted lists. The family engaged with the media, raised awareness on social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo, hoping that someone would recognize him and notify the authorities. The turning point in the investigation came when a reward was offered for information that would lead to Andres's capture. The family pledged a generous sum to anyone who could provide credible information about his location. This approach proved effective, as tips began to emerge. By late 2023, reports indicated that Andres had been seen in a Bolivian city, living a secluded life and avoiding attention while keeping limited contact with locals. Bolivian authorities started monitoring his movements. They learned, through informants, that he was using a false identity, taking odd jobs, and avoiding any official documents that might reveal who he really was. However, he could not remain hidden forever. In January 2024, a local resident reported his exact location to the police. Authorities responded quickly, initiating a targeted operation to capture him. They surrounded the building where Andres was hiding. The operation was quick and efficient. He complied with their commands and was apprehended without resistance. During his arrest, he remained calm, seemingly resigned to his situation. This time, there was no way to escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. After confirming his arrest, Bolivian authorities began the process of extraditing Andres back to Chile. Within days, he was returned to face trial, allowing Javier's family to see the person responsible for their daughter's death held accountable. However, this was just the start of a long battle for them, as they were determined to push for the harshest possible sentence. Once in Chile, Andres was placed in a detention facility, marking a new phase in the investigation. With the main suspect in custody, authorities had a chance to uncover the answers they had sought for over a year and a half. Initially, he refused to cooperate, denying any involvement in Javier's disappearance. However, investigators were ready, armed with evidence linking him to the crime. As the pressure increased, he eventually admitted. His confession lacked any sign of remorse or justification, delivered as if stating a simple fact. He neither portrayed himself as a victim nor showed any regret, maintaining a disturbingly calm demeanor as he spoke. The information he provided directly contradicted his earlier statements. He confessed that he hadn't originally intended to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile and ended their relationship for good, he made a choice he never planned to take back. He tricked her by claiming he had found her lost dog. Trusting him and unaware of what was about to happen, she agreed to meet him. He stated that the crime occurred late at night on a deserted highway. He stopped under the false pretense of looking for a missed suitcase that he claimed had fallen from the trunk. When Javier got out of the truck, he struck her with a fatal blow. Afterwards, he drove further into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body, thinking that the harsh environment would eliminate all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators began searching for the burial site using the coordinates given by Andres. In mid-January 2024, they found human remains in a shallow grave covered with sand. Now, forensic specialists begin the identification process. A few days later, forensic tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Javiera Jimenez. Although the search had ended, the fight for justice was just beginning. His family urged the court to impose the harshest sentence possible on Andres. After his confession, the case was brought to court. There was no doubt about his guilt. His own words, along with the evidence and the discovery of Javier's body, made that clear. It was now the court's responsibility to decide his punishment. Javier's family insists on the harshest penalty, life in prison without parole. They were convinced that he posed a threat to society. For Javiera's mother, true justice guaranteed Andres will never have the chance to re-offend. The prosecution presented all relevant evidence in court, with experts confirming that the crime was premeditated. They highlighted the misleading invitation, the choice to take her to a remote area, and the complete absence of any effort to help her, all of which indicated a well-planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claims of accidental harm. Nevertheless, the defense sought a lighter sentence, arguing that their client had confessed, volunteered, and aided in locating the remains, which they claimed to have cooperated with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this argument, which angered Javier's family. They believed it was clear that Andres's confession was not out of remorse. He only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. He felt no guilt and was merely trying to lessen his sentence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which Gladys participated every session, watching everything unfold. Although she remains composed, her determination was evident in her eyes. Furthermore, in a similar fashion to the disappearance of Javiera Jimenez in August 2022, Andres is also being investigated for being a member of a violent armed gang that steals copper while it is being transported on FCAB trains. Similar crimes were committed by other members of the gang, and the prosecution was able to establish Andres Sutter's involvement through photographs, text messages, and statements from other criminals. In both cases, the court set different investigation dates. For the murder, he was sentenced to 90 days, and for the armed robbery and the copper cathode theft, he was sentenced to 60 days. In addition, Andres remains in custody awaiting trial.